So step one for us is we're going to go ahead and make sure we have our data collections set up. And so I'm going to go over to data collections. I'm going to add a new collection, call it new unique values, create that collection. And I'm going to add two fields to it. I'm going to add a username field, and I'm going to add a SKU. We can call this a number. We validate the same no matter what. In addition to adding these two fields, I want to add a few records that I can validate against. So I'm going to go ahead and add just a few here for us to do. I'm going to do Josh, 1, 2, 3, Mark, 4, 5, 6, Drew, 7, 8, 9, Dorian, 10, 11, 12. So now we've got 4 different unique usernames to take a look at. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to create a field where I can actually run this validation. Now normally this might be your sign up page if you're asking for a username. It might be in a admin setting if you're adding new items to maybe an inventory. Wherever it is, the validation process will look the same. And so I'm going to go ahead and add a new page, call it the new form validation page. I do want to give this some of our shape of our normal pages. So let's go ahead and paste in a component with our menu there. Let's go ahead and paste in our footer. And then I'm going to add a section here. So I have a section for content right in the middle. I'm going to give it a div. In that div, I'm going to include 2 different divs as well. I'll create everything in the first one, and then I'll duplicate it. So in this first div, I'm going to have 2 text inputs, 2 labels, 2 buttons, and then an error message that can be displayed as well. So let's do input. Let's add a button. And then let's give this a little bit of shape so that I can make sure I can put the error message where I want it. And so to do that, I'm actually going to put a div right above the text input, and I'm going to add the text input into it. And inside of this, I'm also going to add another text field. So what I've created here, again, is a label for the field itself, what's going to become an error message, and then the button. So let's go ahead and call this label username. Let's go ahead and say enter username in the placeholder text. For this one, we're going to say error, username is not available. And as we know, I can edit this directly on the canvas as well. Sometimes a little bit easier. And then let's go ahead and update the button text to say check if username is available. Great, so I have a username field, a label field, alert, and this. Now, we know that there should probably be some additional styling here for an error message. So let's go ahead and make that red for an error message. And one additional thing I want to make sure I do is that I actually like to display my error messages inside of my text fields and also add a color to the text field to indicate that there's an error there. So this is why I had this div right here, because the way that we need to do this is first on this div, we need to give this a position of relative, and we need to give the error text a position of absolute. If you don't know, position of absolute inside of CSS basically means it gets put in that exact spot every single time, and it's removed from the rest of the CSS construct of the page. So it ignores what div or section it's in, and it just gets positioned in the spot that you tell it to. The reason that we call this div the relative is because without assigning relative to a parent div to that child absolutely positioned element, it will be positioned off of the whole page. By giving the div a position of relative, we're saying this is the item on the page that we want you to position yourself against, not the entire page itself. So we've got this text field right here. We can tell it's down here right now. 2 things I'm going to do. One, I know our default text typically has a margin on it to give it some natural space. I want to zero that out in this case just to control its spacing. And then I also want it to appear at the top inside of the text element. So I'm going to give it a top value of, let's say 5 pixels. We want a little bit off the top. And I don't want on the left though. I actually want it on the right. So I'm going to give it a right of 5 pixels too. So now you can see it's absolutely positioned at the top right of this particular text field no matter what. Now, one thing I can already tell is that this text field is a little bit small to have an inside error message. I generally like big text fields, especially in like a sign-up form or somewhere where you're going to have end users that you want to make it really easy for them. So I'm going to go ahead and on that text element, increase its size and its height to, let's say 70. Let's take a look at 80 pixels and see what that looks like. That's a little big. Let's go down to 70. That looks good. We'll go ahead and roll with that. One final thing I noticed is that I need a little bit of space between my text field and my username field there. So I'm going to add some margin top. I'm just going to give it margin of 1 EM. So now there's a little bit of space. So now that I have my first form created, I want to create my second one. So I'm going to just choose this div right here that holds everything. I'm going to click duplicate, and I'm going to get my SKU form field. So I'm going to update all of this text and copy for SKU. Excellent. And in reality, what I really want, I want these to be side by side. And I also want to make sure that they're kind of positioned naturally in the middle of the page and not taking up the full page. So in the section of this, I'm going to go ahead and add padding so that it's going to have padding around the elements no matter what on the page. And so I'm going to add padding. Let's just go ahead and say 3 EMs of padding. By putting it around all of it, it's going to make sure that there's 3 EMs of space no matter what around its objects. Now, in the div that I put both of my form fields in, I'm going to select that. I'm going to go to layout and give it a flex layout so that they're side by side instead of stacked on top of each other. And so what I want to do is I want to go ahead and make sure that these get spread out a little bit though. So I'm going to go ahead and do spaced apart. That's going to spread each item as wide as it can possibly go. The final thing I'm going to do is right now these divs are shrinking to fit the content of it based off of what the rules of this particular text field is because it has a max width of 400. What I would like to do is have these be 45% of the width of the page. So I can go to size, I can go to width, and I can do 45%. So now it's 45% of the div that it's inside of. Sorry, not the page, just the div itself. And so that will look a little bit better. Obviously, we're on a smaller screen right now, but when I go to a full screen, it's going to be a little bit bigger. And I want to give the same property to the other div, so I'm going to go ahead and duplicate that. So now it's a little bigger. So now I've got the 2 form fields. I've got the error message. Let's do SKU there. I've got the error message. And I want to go ahead and now I need to add my style class for error. So we're going to do a style class of new error field, create it. And when this is an error, I want the background to be, we're not going to do the same color red as the text. Let's just go ahead and do pink. Normally I would do a little bit of a different hue of the red here. We'll go pink for now. And so now we have an error field message style class that we can use. So I can add that. I need to go ahead and hide these error messages for now because I don't need to see them. So we're going to go to layout. We're going to go display to none. Click on this one. We're going to go to layout again, display to none. The final thing I want to do, in this case, normally in a flow that you're maybe adding a new user, you're probably going to have like a new page that gets opened up. In this case, I'm just going to update the button when it is a successful username that does not have an error. I'm just going to update the button to reflect that. And so I'm going to click on the button. I'm going to create a style class, new successful button. This style class is going to do one thing. Actually, it's going to do 2 things. we're going to say the background color becomes green. And we're going to say the font color becomes white. And so we'll see that right there. So that looks good. So we're going to use that in the flow. So we have all the style classes that we want created that we're going to use, and we have the error messages. So now we have to create the actual logic for this particular form.